Greetings. My name is Eli Anderson, and I am the storytelling expert for the StoryAidEU project. I teach, lecture, write, and deliver a range of storytelling courses and productions. Today, it's my pleasure to guide you through the exciting module number 10, which is the power of self-care. Now, during this module, you'll be asked to consider what the broad concept is, caring for yourself, some ways to care for oneself, and examples of caring for yourself. And certainly the module overview will have some historical references, certainly to deal with the professional responsibility of caring for yourself, and some of the fundamentals that will be couched within the practice of caring for yourself in an interprofessional group, some key studies, and some model cases that will lead to some practical examples and how you might do so. Now, I spoke earlier about the history of caring for yourself. There are a number of things that we should be aware of. And certainly, caring for yourself is a cultivation of self, a development of self, a conscious freedom. And it is the practice of meditation, the practice of telling the truth about yourself, which defines this level of normalization or what is the human experience. It is an act and a practice of doing that. And so it becomes a way of an art of freedom, a way of dealing with and reflecting on your practices, your rights, your privileges, those things that are synonymous with being human. Now, that leads us to this idea of theory for caring for ourselves. And the theories really encompass a number of different broad structures, societal structures and community histories, which encapsulate human experiences. Now, also, caring for yourself is dependent upon one's understanding of what constitutes identity. And it is this that runs through our lives, our cultural backgrounds, our religious backgrounds, which can dictate our belief systems. And also, it's that once that happens, it's an experience of oneself, to speak truthfully of oneself without fear. Foucault, in 1984, said something that was remarkable. For what is ethics, if not the practice of freedom, the conscious practice of freedom? I'll say that again. For what is ethics, if not the practice of freedom, the conscious practice of freedom? Now that leads us to our defining attributes for caring for yourself. We've spoken about the freedom to speak one's truth, the ability to meditate and explore one's conscience, also to define humanity without and heritage without objection, objectification, the ability to define the physical, emotional, and spiritual support without fear of inhumane consequences, which will run through the whole of the modules that you'll hear about. Now, we talked about the freedom to speak one's truth. Now, that is critical. That's the first defining attribute. The second defining attribute is the ability to meditate and explore one's own consciousness. And this will come to light as we go through this particular module. The third defining attribute, which is the freedom to define one's humanity and heritage without objectification, is to feel confident about your humanity and not to be seen as abnormal to the normal. And also the fifth one is to really look at how we define our physical, emotional, and spiritual support that one requires without fear of inhumane consequences. Now, this is reinforced by the question, why is caring for oneself important? Again, it is reinforcing the act of maintaining one's individual power to determine and express one's authenticity and identity, by Adams and Hutchinson in 2019. All medical personnel, medical doctors, palliative care specialists are affected by chronic stress and unprocessed grief and patient loss. Caring for yourself in this situation ensures that you don't make those poor decisions, that you are physically dealing and spiritually and consciously dealing with those chronic stress issues. Now, once you're dealing with that, you need an awareness that these are things that are significant, and not to exclude the impact it will have on your heritage, your psycho-spiritual and historical aspects that must be expressed and reflected upon in order to be a human being. And lastly, the act of remembering and applying these unique care strategies challenge and prevent trauma and re-traumatization, which are specific systems that go through education, healthcare processes, and biomedical models. Now, caring for yourself has a more powerful thing that can take place in collaborative practice. And once you are collaborating and dealing with caring for yourself in teams and in groups, this has a positive, consistent psychological impact. If you are not doing it, then this leads to consistent psychological compromises, burnout, self-medication, etc. And those health professionals who've had little experience of practicing authentic collaborative support will find themselves consistently without emotional protection. And lastly, the collaborative support is truly important to really apply this to the heritage or the indigenous methods, to collaborate with those indigenous methods to ensure that we again do not other those people who are part of our professional structures. Now, there are frameworks that really support that. And one of them is the World Health Organization, which defines self-care as the ability of individuals and families and communities to promote, maintain health, prevent disease, and to cope with illness with or without the support of healthcare provider. That's the WHO 2013. It's absolutely wonderful, and hopefully you'll be scribbling this down. Some of those other structures we've talked about is about how do we look at the aspects of our nutrition, our lifestyle, our environmental situation, the socio-economic factors. All these are part of caring for yourself. There is an urgency to build into the healthcare education curriculum opportunities for protecting caring for ourselves. It is critical that the biomedical model begins to weave this within itself. Now, if that doesn't happen, what we are doing is traumatizing, re-traumatizing people in a very highly pressured environment. And as you said before, it is a mixture. The caring for yourself is a mixture of mindfulness, meditation, yoga, practice, indigenous practices, etc., which gives the vulnerable person, the person doing it, and the collective an awareness. Now, you will at this page have a number of great papers which I encourage you to read. Adams and Hutchinson, definitely, and Neroli et al. Those are excellent, excellent papers. And Aurora. Now, the model case that we're talking about is the woman with diabetes. And in this situation, she's in a hospital, and the impact of being in a hospital is re-traumatizing. The nurse, the healthcare professional, after a number of times, goes to her to ask her what it is that she's feeling. She's obviously anxious, obviously feeling stressed. And it's important for this person, for the nurse asking the questions, to really identify, help her to speak her truth. Now, when the nurse applies that and begins to look at what that truth is, the nurse uses her own truth, her own stories to enable the person to help her. So she becomes part of that connection with the person who has come in for a diabetes injury. And without that, and that conversation allows that person to give her information for her aunt. And it is in that relationship that the woman feels that less anxious. She feels as though there are people there that are supporting her, and she has something to say. Now, there are many examples of this practice being delivered or developed in part. Kerman City, Iran, the homeless veterans in the US, and York, the UK. Now, in order to wrap up at this point, it's truly important that you care for yourself as a priority. It is a practice, it's something that you need to be doing regularly, not once a week or twice a week, if you can, every time you are involved in your work. It improves your physical and your mental and your emotional condition. Caring for yourself is also deeply personal, truly personal, and it really acknowledges the positive strengths of your heritage, your dignity, and your identity, and it explores the authenticity of your humanity in relationship to your professional responsibilities and the vulnerable patients. Acknowledging the act of caring for yourself can have a fourfold effect, both on the health professional, the patient, the loved ones, and the healthcare person and colleagues with whom you collaborate. Thank you so much for listening, and I do hope that this module helps you on your journey.